Okay, so today I just wanted to make a video about connecting to a Raspberry Pi or a Linux server using PuTTy and transferring files between your Linux server and your Windows machine or even another Linux machine. I won't go too much in depth. I'm just going to show the different software, how to use them, and then go from there. So the first one I want to talk about is PuTTy. So PuTTy is a SSH client for Windows that will allow you to connect to a Linux machine via Windows. So for example, here where it asks for the host name, you would put your Raspberry Pi's IP address, and the command to get the IP address on the Raspberry Pi is just through the console, and you would just type ifconfig, no spaces and all lowercase, and that would return to you somewhere in that jumble your IP address. So in my case, my IP address, I already have it set up here because you can save different servers for different information for those servers. So by default, SSH is on port 22, so you shouldn't have to mess with that. Once you put that in, you just click open, and as you can see, I get this screen where it's asking me to log in. So you're going to use the login that you would use on the Raspberry Pi. I think generally it's by default, I think it's Pi, and then I think the password is Raspberry. You might have to double check, but basically it's the login that you use on your Raspberry Pi or your Linux machine. So you'd log in. Let's see if I can remember my password. So you'd log in, and as you can see, you might get a message. Actually, sorry, I should mention this because this isn't my first time connecting. You might get a message about accessing this for the first time. Do you want to continue? And you'll just click yes at that prompt, and it will allow you to connect to the machine. So once we're inside the machine, we can now use Linux commands to move around and see what's inside. So as you can see, I have different directories. So if I go to if I change directories to my documents, and I will list everything that's in there. Let me make this a little bit bigger. As you can see, there's BlueJ projects. I have like a make file for my Uncle Dan. I have a temperature reading program and a text and a make file and all this stuff. And we can actually run commands through here. So if I were to, for example, use the GCC and compile this C program, which is something completely different, it will compile. And then we could run temp read, which and I would have to use sudo. So that's actually a good time to bring up using sudo. So anytime that it asks you for permission or it says permission is denied, just use the command sudo, and that will actually allow you to override that. And sorry, I am being stupid. I'm writing C. We actually want to run the file that it just doesn't end with a C. That's what we compiled in the beginning, but sorry, this is just confusing. So that's all that program does. And to get out of a program, if you want to just escape a program, is either Control C or Control Z, depending on the program. But anyways, so that's just an example of us controlling my Raspberry Pi. My Raspberry Pi is actually over here. And it's nice because we can run Python scripts, we can run C programs, we can edit files, but keep it on the Raspberry Pi. So if I wanted to, for example, edit this temperature.txt file, so temperature, we would write nano temperature.txt. As you can see, this little file comes up, and we could actually replace the text in here, and we could write and whatever else inside this file. So it's a really strong way of being able to control things on your Raspberry Pi. The second thing I wanted to talk about is called SFTP. So FTP is file transfer protocol, so it's just transferring files, and FTP alone is pretty insecure. But if you use SFTP, it's secure, and it makes it a lot harder for people to access your files, things like that. So what we're going to use for this is on Windows. You can do it through the console on Linux, but on Windows we're going to use a program called FileZilla. There's other programs out there. This is the one that I'm most comfortable with. And what you do when you open up FileZilla, you'll see your files on the left-hand side, and then you can press this little button here, and it'll pop up with your information to your Raspberry Pi. So in my case, this is the local IP address that I'm running on it, and I'm going to use SFTP. I don't want to use FTP. But just for kicks and giggles, so what we'll do if we were setting up a new one, we would set it to SFTP, and we would change logon type to normal, and that's where we would put in our username and the password. If you leave it on anonymous and stuff like that, you might run into issues if the server isn't configured for that. So anyways, yeah, I know. I actually don't want to keep you. That's just an example. Okay, so if we come back here and this all looks good, we don't need to necessarily designate a port unless that's something you have done on your machine. And we hit connect. As you can see on the right-hand side, I have all my files, which is really cool. And this is all the same files that we were able to see through PuTTy. But the advantage of this is that we can actually transfer and download files from the Raspberry Pi without, you know, taking a USB stick, plugging it in, taking the files out. So if we go to documents, for example, you'll see, remember that temperature text file. So let's say I wanted to add this client script, this Python script that I wrote for it's like a chat client, I think. All you would literally have to do is drag and drop it, and if it's a bigger file, you'll see down here, like if it's a big file that you're transferring, you'll see down here like a progress bar. In my case, it's just a little text file, so it's really quick, and you can see it's here in the directory on the Raspberry Pi. But let's make sure that it's actually there. So we're in documents on the console in SSH, and we're in documents on SFTP, and we just added temperature.txt. Or sorry, we added client.py, my bad. And as you can see, when we listed our directory up here, there was no client.py. So now if we were to go ls, you'll see right there that we actually added client.py through FileZilla. So it's extremely powerful. There's multiple things that you can do with it. One thing that I do regularly is I like to program on my desktop, so I'll program a script or something like that on the desktop, and then I'll use FileZilla to transfer those files to the Raspberry Pi. So that's FileZilla. The last thing I wanted to talk about is VNC. So what VNC is, I'll have to excuse my dogs stretching behind me. So what VNC is another cool program that allows us to see and control the desktop environment of the Raspberry Pi. So my Raspberry Pi, I could show you, it is plugged into a monitor, but I don't really use the monitor. I only use it, you know, when I really want it. So if I need to see something on the desktop or change something, I can connect to it here. And so if we close this, you'll see that it's kind of like a virtual machine. We're actually controlling the Raspberry Pi from VNC, and it's advantageous to use this, especially if you're, for example, if we're changing configurations, you know, system configurations and stuff like that. So if we head over here, one thing to note is that we have to come here and we have to go into interfaces in order to, I should have said this at the beginning of the video, in order to use SSH and VNC, we need to enable them. And sometimes that requires a restart on the Raspberry Pi. Sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on what you're enabling. I'm pretty sure it will ask you to restart. But yeah, so this is really nice because I can control my Raspberry Pi. And here I'm controlling the Raspberry Pi through SSH, but I can't see exactly what I'm doing. So if I want to physically see and I come here to documents, you'll see client.py is right there. So it's a really powerful tool to be able to move stuff around and control your Raspberry Pi from a desktop. The really nice part, I can kind of show you. I'll show you actually how to set up VNC at the beginning. So when you open up VNC, this will be empty. This won't show up. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to go to New Connection, and you'll just type in the IP address here, the name, and everything else. I'm pretty sure I left default. So that being said, it's a really powerful tool. You can control your Raspberry Pi doing that. I do want to make another video going over different commands inside the terminal to be used. But for now, I think that's a pretty good video showing you guys how to control different devices. And like I said, this can apply for servers too. So like at school, we have a Linux server. I connect to the Linux server using PuTTy if I'm on Windows. If I'm not on Windows, let's say this is my terminal and I'm on a Linux machine, the command to connect through SSH is really simple. It would be just like this, SSH, and then your IP address here, or yeah, I suppose you could do it that way, or you could do user at IP address, and that would allow you to connect to another device. So I have actually I use that consistently on my Linux laptop. But anyways, this is just an intro to how to use this stuff. So hopefully, you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.